and the ugly about digital gaming's kind of convergence into our kind of wider culture. So one thing to think about is gameplay. How do we interact with the games? Because we're going to notice that elements of gameplay are going to spill out of the gaming world into the rest of our life. So by gameplay, we don't mean, is it a role-playing game or is it a sports game? But what we mean is, how are we interacting with the game? So with mobile apps, we do things like tapping and swiping. With puzzle games, you want to complete something. Now, with a lot of games, what you want to do is to gather up points until you reach the next level and you unlock something in your character. Other games, you want to get achievements, and that shows you get trophies. You want to get more points than somebody else. So those are ways in which games function regardless of what genre they're in. So if we're thinking of genres, that would be like action games, shooter games, first-person shooters, third-person shooters. Adventure games, where oftentimes, again, you're trying to be the hero. Role-playing games. So again, you're taking on a specific character. In that case, usually or oftentimes it's more ambiguous than you're just the hero, but oftentimes there's classes involved and you're kind of playing out your personality. Strategy games or simulation games. Casual gaming, oftentimes social media gaming falls into casual gaming, our match threes, all those kind of things. We also have sports games. You can have music games. Rock Band was absolutely huge for a long time. DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, that was a huge craze for a while. So there's lots of different genres of games. But in each genre at times has certain conventions to gameplay, but there are certain things that are common among various genres. So looking at those genres, you kind of get a sense there's pretty much down the middle between kind of shooter action games and everything else. And role-playing at times can again fall into action. At times there can be overlaps with shooters as well, something like BioShock. But, generally you're going to fall into one area or another. So you can see, though, that there's a dominant market force in those kind of heavily action-oriented games. And shooters often very action-oriented, although specifically it's around kind of the violence of the kind of player towards other players or to non-player characters. And then we've got racing games, strategy games, fighting games, adventure games, so that being less on the action side, so more narrative-driven, sports games, and role-playing games. So as you can see, heavily geared towards that kind of action side of things. So that's going to have an impact on, because that's the market, again, these are 4-year-old figures, so that might have shifted a little bit. But even if you think about those kind of battle royale games, if you're thinking of something like Apex, that's kind of action shootery. That's not really a strategy game. It's not really a role-playing game either, because you don't have any ability to have moral choices involved. Not really adventure. It's very much in that kind of action shooter area. So that's what in society we think of when we think about video games. So that has an impact on how we approach gaming, but also has an impact in the stories that are told, because you can see how much money is involved in creating a game. You don't want to sink that money unless you think you're going to get a return on it. So as sports is growing for sure, and I'm pretty sure that that sports number would have grown between 2016 and 2020, but, it's still not going to be as dominant as, say, Modern Warfare. So we have to think about that in terms of money spend and where that ends up impacting societally. In terms of advertising, in a lot of those areas where we're not seeing. So in here, this is by units sold, not dollars spent. So keep that in mind too. So in the case of we want to make money off the game, again, you can either have it be like buy units, so you pay for it for the game, or you can have a subscription, so in the case of something like Elder Scrolls, World of Warcraft, or you can have it be as some kind of freemium game. So one way to deal with that monetarily is to have the game be sponsored by someone, because it's basically promotion. You're using the game side of things, but in order to sell something. So it's kind of like an infomercial. But the thing is, these can be really popular and a lot of fun, even though they're basically just made to sell you something. Recent example. I Love You, Colonel Sanders, a finger-looking good dating simulator. Came out about a year ago. This is, no kidding, a dating game based on Kentucky Fried Chicken. It was made by Kentucky Fried Chicken. As you can see, the publisher is Kentucky Fried Chicken. So, dating games, absolutely huge, especially in the Asian market. And as you can see by the visuals, it's very much going for an anime Asian feel. And so it's saying, hey, you really like those Asian dating games? You'll love this Kentucky Fried Chicken dating game. I'm not even kidding. This is hugely popular. It seems like it should be silly and shouldn't be real. It is. So people are using the fact that games are now part of our regular culture. They're not just niche. They're not just for geeks sitting in their basement. And they're saying, how can we use this to make money? Obviously, there's also in-game advertising. A lot of that goes back to that search engine optimization. So we can tailor them based on our players, but we can also do things like within social media gaming where people can go, oh, hey, lots of people play Farmville. We're going to have a farmer's insurance ad. Or The Sims are absolutely huge. Again, they're published by EA, Electronic Arts, the same people who do FIFA and Madden. And so The Sims can have ads in it. So when we talk about having ads pop up based on your social media algorithms, so I was looking at, funnily enough, AIC grad programs for one of my advisees. Well, that made I play this game in order to fall asleep at night. It's kind of like Sudoku. Well, apparently it thinks that I should want an ad for AIC. So I'm sorry, AIC, you've been paying for me to see this ad. Even if I wanted to do that, it would be free for me, and I was looking it up for a student. But, appreciate the thought. So, gotta be careful about those AdWords. Because, as you can see, I just said this game I play in order to fall asleep at night. So, one of the things is that because we have games as such a normal part of our daily life, there is an issue with internet gaming addiction, especially around like the subscription games and games where you are taking part in a virtual world. We can end up having people have real issues with addiction and withdrawal. Now, it says, as you see here, as the book says, there have been studies it's more likely to affect males. To be honest, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that societally we encourage males tend to be more drawn towards the video games that are produced. And so again, there is a propensity to assume males are gamers, therefore men will play more video games, women aren't gamers, so women are discouraged from playing video games at the ages when you're tending to form those connections. So I don't think that that's because men are more predisposed to being addicted to video games. I think it has to do with the fact that because as a society, we have this assumption that more men game than women, there are going to be more men who are going to be addicted than women. Turns out men aren't more likely to game than women. More recently, 2018 data has showed that 50% of the game market is female. Now, obviously that wasn't the case 20 years ago, but that is the case now. but we do still tell the stories that are going to be more attractive towards men in that 50% of games that are shooters and action, because there is a societal assumption that gamers are men. So again, this is how thinking about how it sits in culture can inform the stories that we tell and can inform who we're selling games to. So by design, games are addictive. The achievement system that is used in most games is designed to set off a serotonin response in your brain. This is especially true of MMORPGs. And so every time you get an achievement, serotonin, happy feelings. Every time you level up, serotonin, happy feelings. If you don't level up, no serotonin, no happy feeling, you get withdrawal. And these have been so good that when we were developing our phones to be used, they used this same idea, this gamification, this taking the idea from games and putting it into things other than games in order to make your phone addictive, in order to make it so you want that serotonin hit every time you look at your phone and pick it up. And it's so good that the government had to say, you need to make phones less addictive, otherwise we're going to step in and we are going to regulate the phone industry. So as we're normalizing gamification, as we're normalizing utilizing game techniques outside of video games, we are developing attachments to these non-game devices, these non-game applications, but in a way that we still want that serotonin response. This is why your money-saving app will give you cute little reminders, use cute little creatures. This is why that app will have you get achievements and give you badges and level you up. It wants you to have a good association, a happy, positive association with that app, and it wants you to get that serotonin from it. And this can be used for good, like if you want to save money, but it also can be used by apps that want to suck up your time and money. And that's why we have to now have it so that you confirm when you're going to spend money, because people were racking up huge debt without even realizing it because they wanted that serotonin hit. Now, it can be, again, a great way to do workforce training. We can use it in our classrooms. We can use it to engage people in social causes. But I want you to think about who's using it, why they're using it, and is it for good or for ill? Because not everyone, as we can see with the KFC game, is going to be using it for good. So when you're looking at your app for your first major media critique, think about, are there game elements involved in your app? And is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? So this can be a great way to kind of tie that in, especially when you get to that so what stage in your media critique. So what? Does it matter whether or not there's gamification? Does it help? Does it hinder? Does it make it more addictive? What do you think? Because that's really what I would like you to do, is to have you think about how these things impact wider society. So when we're talking about other concerns like how it's wider society, with that assumption that men make up more than 50% of those who are going to be consuming video games, we are going to play to stereotypical male interests. We're going to play up to kind of stereotypical ideals of masculinity. And so that's where we get this incorrect assumption that video games are all going to be violent, or the only video games that sell are going to be ones that have gore. And then again, we get concerned as a society about that encouraging certain personality traits. There's absolutely no data to suggest that people who play video games are any more violent than anybody else, nor even those who play first-person shooters are any more violent than anybody else. But there is a societal concern about that. Again, issues around because of the fact that we have this assumption that most of the people who play video games are men, then there's a tendency towards misogyny in video games. And so part of that isn't just about who they think they're marketing to, but who's making the games. In the video game industry, if you are in it for more than 5 years, that's incredibly long because the burnout rate is ridiculously high in the video game industry, especially in the development side of things. So you're tending to have high turnover. And again, because there is a cultural assumption that it is more male, because again, coders, obviously that's going to be more men. I'm just going to say Angelina Jolie hackers. That because of that, there's a tendency to have a more misogynist culture within video game industries. I mean, come on, see Gamergate. It's not about ethics in game journalism, guys. So because of that, there then tends to be misogyny in the stories that are told as well. Now, there's been a huge shift in the past, I'd say 10 years, 5 years especially, towards telling stories that are much more diverse and to a real kind of renaissance in not just stories that are more female driven, but that show a diverser set of characters across the board, in terms of diversity, in terms of race and ethnicity, in terms of LGBTQIA, in terms of, obviously, gender is another area. But even within, say, shooters and action, we're telling more diverse stories. We're realizing that our audience is a lot wider than maybe what people thought it was. So, and also realizing that there's absolutely no data to back up that if you play a violent game, you're going to be a violent person. This has been one thing you're going to... this is something you'll see in almost every area, that there's the, oh, what about the children that comes up. And these same things, they've come up since the 70s. They come up in the 90s. They come up today. It's cyclical. It comes up over and over again, this concern. And yet we find that there's no data to back it up. There have been attempts to make sure that violent games, games with sexually explicit content, games with swearing, don't fall into the hands of children. So that's why we have our Entertainment Software Rating Board, ESRB. It's kind of like the video game version of the explicit content warning in music, that we categorize games. Now, there's absolutely no government body saying you have to use them. But there's pressure from within the industry because video game makers feel like they need to use these, otherwise the government will step in. Many retailers will only sell games that are rated. But if you go onto Steam, yes, it'll have a little thing that makes you self-select and say, yes, I am over 18, but there's absolutely nothing that says you have to be 18 in order to buy the game. So again, we're seeing a shift. This is much more of an issue for those box games, things you're buying on Amazon. So there's no criminal or legal precedent. California's tried, but the Supreme Court has says, nope, video games have free speech, First Amendment protection. It's not going to make that rating system go away, but it's not enforceable by law. So just think about whose voices are heard. I think that's the thing that you'll notice I'm coming back to again and again with the relationship between any media and wider culture. Thinking about the fact that now that we have more access to independent games through things like Steam and GOG and Kickstarter, as well as mobile gaming, then while you still need time and money, people who have stories to tell outside of the mainstream are getting more of a chance to tell those stories, and that is only a good thing in allowing representation for people and allowing us to actually have, so for example, if 50% of gamers are female, maybe we want to be able to play a female in our games. Maybe we don't want to only be able to play Geralt, we want to be able to play Ciri, damn it. So we're getting a chance to do that. And again, it's not just, we're used to seeing our avatars often having not only being white. We're not being able to play a character that has a different skin tone, or you can change the skin tone, but none of the other characteristics change. So we're able to actually now, especially with graphics getting better, more accurately represent ourselves in games so that we feel like we can literally see ourselves in these games, that they're not made for other people, by other people, but they're made by us, for us. So it's kind of nice to see in this kind of renaissance of gaming. And I like that gaming is becoming more mainstream, but there is that trade-off where people can use those gamification elements in order to make games addictive and to draw people in. And again, especially as this becomes more mainstream, it's not just guys who are getting affected. We're all affected by it. It's not just young people, old people too. So realizing that the things that can be used for good can also be used for ill, and just being really critical about how these things sit within our society.